Hello everyone. Today we're going to be discussing the concept of simple trinomial factoring of the form x squared plus bx plus c. Let's get started. Okay, so the key today is going to be this formula that I've already listed up here. Let's write it out. X squared plus bx plus c. But I'm going to change a couple of these colors. So we're actually going to put, instead of this green here, we're going to put this B, oops, in the green. We're going to put this B here. And we're going to put this C here in blue, because this B and this C, they just represent any old number, right? So these two values here represent any number, right? And the objective of today's lesson is going to be put this value, x squared plus bx plus c, as an expression that looks somewhat like this. It's going to look like this. It's going to look like x plus or minus m, and I'm just going to do that in blue as well, just to show you the same concept. And right here, x plus or minus n, right? And again, m and n are going to be any number, right? So today's lesson is going to focus on how do we take our values of b and c and make them into these values we expect of m and n. So the first rule is going to be very straightforward. We need to find two numbers whose product is equal to the value of c, right, to the exact same blue c that we had, and whose sum is equal to this value of b, right? Now, just going over our basic skills, we know that when we have a product of a positive and a positive, we end up with a positive. And when we have a product of a negative and a negative, we also get a positive, right? But when the sign changes, when it's plus or minus, or vice versa, we actually get a value that's negative, right? So these signs here are going to help tell us what sign we need to use right here. Okay? And same idea for the sum. So we know that if we have a big number plus or minus a small number, right, we might have a positive or we might have a negative. And again, these values will impact what values we have for m and n. So that's the whole objective here. Now, once we found these numbers, right, the next thing we're going to do, oops, the next thing we're going to do is to place m and n with their signs into adjacent brackets, right? So remember, we talked about right here this concept of having m and n, and you have this whole setup right here that looks like x plus m and x minus x plus m and x plus or minus m and x plus or minus n. We're going to have to actually build that, right? So these are the two steps that we're always going to need to use when we're trying to figure out how to conduct our simple trinomial factoring. So let's use an example. So here's my example. My example is going to look like this. And again, we're going to have to go here and make it look like this. Right? And of course, we talked about this last week. This process is known as factoring. Right? Just like it says up there. Okay, so let's use an example, and I'm going to show you these steps with this example. Let's go down here. So our example for today is going to be x squared minus 2x minus 80. Okay? So again, if we go back to our previous thing, if we're looking at step 1, we're trying to find two numbers whose product is going to be this external value and whose sum is going to be this internal value. Right? And when we're writing this, we don't just want to write this as 80. We want to write this as negative 80. And this will come in handy in a second. So the sum is also going to be negative 2. Right? So let's think about two numbers that satisfy this criteria. What's easy is that we can go off the factor set of negative 80. Right? So what two numbers that we know multiply to create negative 80? Well, we have negative 1 and positive 80. Right? That's not going to work. Because obviously if we go ahead and find the sum, we actually get a sum of, we get a sum of 79. So this is not going to work. And you go through this process, you repeat it a couple of times, and we can come across two numbers that do satisfy this criteria right here. The two numbers are negative 10 and positive 8, right? Because if we do negative 10 multiplied by positive 8, we get negative 80, which is the same value as up here. And if we take negative 10 and positive 8, right? And we do negative 10 plus positive 8, we arrive at a value of negative 2, which is exactly what we wanted right over here. So we've got our two values that we need, the negative 10 and the positive 8, and now we just have to follow step 2, which, if we just go back to review, step 2 was to place m and n into the adjacent brackets, right? So let's go ahead and do that right now. We have this bracket, which is going to be x. Let's just put x for now. And we have x, right? And we know in the middle we're going to have plus or minus m, and then plus, or minus n, right? And we know from our previous work that this value, negative 80, we're going to call this m, and this value, negative 2, we're going to call this n, because these are the two values we're looking for in the actual factorization. So let's put this together. So what we're going to have is we're going to have x, right? Our first value, m, is going to be is going to be equal to, so we're going to be a little more careful here. This is not m and n. Our m and n values are not negative 80 and 2, because these come directly from the product and the sum. Our m and n values are actually going to be these two numbers. So right here, we have our m and n values. So once again, let's put this together. So, what is our m value? Well, we look at our work, and our m value is going to be negative 10. It actually doesn't matter which bracket you put it inside, because if we put negative 10 over here instead, it would be the exact same thing. It would just be that the multiplication would be reversed. So that's the same thing anyway. And then over here, we have x plus or minus n. Well, what's n in this case? our n value is going to be positive 8. Right? And that's done. So if we go all the way back to our actual question, this is the factored form of this. Right? Now I'm also going to cover how we can go the other way. And of course we talked about this last week. When we go the other way, we call this an expansion. Right? And it's very easy. You guys actually know how to do this already. We just need to FOIL. So if we take a look, we're right over here. Right? And we're going to go through our foiling technique. Where we know this is going to be x squared. We know that the second one is going to be plus 8x. The third one is going to be minus 10x. And the last one right here is going to be negative 80, which equals 2x squared minus 2x minus 80, which, if we go back to our actual question, matches it exactly. Right, so I'm going to zoom out a little more so you guys can see. So you can see here that what I have in gold, which is my original question, matches what we got when we did the expansion. Right? And again, if we wanted to go backwards, we can, once again, factor. Okay? So, going through the entire steps, this is exactly how we come up with the factored product. The first thing we do is we identify the two numbers. You find the m and the n values. You look at the two numbers. You find the product, the sum, the two values that do that. One is going to be m, one's going to be n. And then all you got to do is you just got to place them into brackets. So once again, this is our question here. I'm going to highlight that. Oops, that's not highlighting. I'm going to highlight our question here. And this was the answer we came up with. Alright, now we're going to go to the PowerPoint slides, and I have a couple more examples for us to do.